Hey everybody, Tommy here. Before we get into this week's Chaser episode with author John F. Lyons, I just wanted to alert you to a couple exciting things we have going on here at Blotto HQ. First, mark your calendars for Friday, February 26th. We are super chuffed to announce that will be the first live virtual Blotto Beatles Trivia Night. We are getting some of our friends together from other podcasts. We're hosting a great night. We're going to be asking for some donations, if you can spare any change for us, and we're going to donate all that money to charity. So more information coming soon on our socials and on our website. And I am going to ask you, maybe listen up to next week's episode. That'll give you a better idea of why we're focusing on a specific charity for this event. Secondly, we are equally chuffed. We just got to be guests on another podcast called The Alphabetical Fugazi. If you've never heard of the band Fugazi, they are one of our favorites here at Blotto HQ besides the Beatles. An independent band in the post-punk spirit that we just all really love. So we were all super excited to join host Ian talking about the Fugazi song, I'm So Tired. That is going to be released this Saturday, February 13th. So please check out the Alphabetical Fugazi wherever you get your podcasts, and listen up in a month or so, because Ian also came on our cast recently to talk about the Beatles song, I'm So Tired, in a crossover event. So those are the exciting bits of news here at Blotto HQ. Without further ado, here is your Chaser. Well, we are here for another Blotto Beatles Extrasode. Guys, it's been a while since we've done a Chaser, since we've dipped in between our regular episodes. I'm excited to be here for a great reason tonight. For those of you out there,
on a school night also.
A school night, here we go.
Which is a rarity.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, this is the show where usually a few friends have a few drinks and come together to discuss and rank a single Beatles song. Tonight we're doing something a little different here on Blotto Beatles, and before we get into that, I want to introduce who we have in the virtual Abbey Road tonight. I am one of your hosts. My name is Tommy. I am here, as always, with my good friend, Pete Best to my Paul McCartney. That's complimentary, right?
Not a compliment.
I'm sorry. Okay. We'll say a good John and Paul mix here. It is my friend Becker. How you doing, man?
Great, buddy. Great. Nice to see you on a Thursday.
I know, Thursday night. This is a little wild for us. Get ready. And always, listeners, we wouldn't do the Extrasode without him. He is the George Martin of New England. It is executive producer Scotty C. How you doing?
I'm great. This is fun. I'm excited for this Thursday get-together.
Yeah, Thursday Extra. And we are recording an actual episode tomorrow night, guys. So this is a little doubleheader. This is kind of like Beatles American Tour. We're just getting run ragged out here on the streets. It's wild. But we are here for a specific reason, and I don't want to go too long without welcoming our guest. We're pretty lucky tonight, everyone. We have the author of the new book, Joy and Fear, The Beatles, Chicago, and the 1960s. Please join me in welcoming, renowned author, John F. Lyons. How are you tonight, John?
Well, hello, boys.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure. I'd even go further and say I'm chuffed.
Oh, you're chuffed.
We're chuffed. Are you familiar with that word?
We love chuffed.
Do they have that on the East Coast?
We're
bringing it back. Yeah.
Deep research. We're, you can, John, we've been online for a few minutes. You can probably tell there's some scholarly attitudes coming from this podcast. We go deep on the research. And in our initial research looking to the podcast, I asked the important source, Google, what's some English slang for being excited? And chuffed was the first one that came up, and we've been using it ever since.
It's a good word to use, and it really does sum up how I feel. Because I've listened to every episode of your podcast. I follow you on Facebook. I follow you on Instagram. I follow you on Twitter.
Thank you for the loyalty. That's tremendous.
Now, the only slight problem is, though, you don't follow me back.
We follow you
No,
on
don't.
Instagram. I am.
Well, I haven't seen it. I think now that you're these big pod superstars, that you got no interest now in people like me, little people that follow you. So go back into your social media and check.
Yeah, we will
absolutely rectify that before this launches. But I'm pretty sure we follow you.
I'm going to talk to the assistant to my assistant and make sure this gets rectified.
Someone's getting fired at Blotto HQ.
Exactly. So. Some people need to get fired here.
That's happening.
But anyway, no, it's a pleasure to be on.
No, thank you so much for joining us. We've got a ton of questions about this book. I'm excited.
John, it seems like writing a Beatles book is really hard. Like, did you ever think about just getting drunk and spouting off about the Beatles instead? Because it's working for us.
Well, funny enough, I did. And I did have this idea about actually having a book that was going to be about beer and the Beatles.
Oh, man.
But the more I thought about it, though, I thought, no, I think I'll just stick to the Beatles. Just forget about it. I'll keep the beer as a sort of social rather than a professional side of my character.
But you are drinking a beer tonight. I saw it in your hand. What do you have in your cup this evening, John?
Okay, so I thought I'd start off with a local beer. Now, I'm in Chicago. As you say, you wouldn't know that from my accent, but I'm living in Chicago. And Chicago's got some very good breweries. Mm-hmm. We've got a very good beer selection here. And one of the breweries I like is Goose Island, which is quite well known. And the beer I'm drinking at the moment is called Green Line, which I do highly recommend. And I first used to drink a beer that they used to have called Honkers Ale.
Yep, sure.
You know that one? Yeah, it's a great name.
Yeah, we can get
Honkers
that.
Ale. And for some reason, they've discontinued it. I can't find it anywhere. And so, and I was very upset over this. But in the last few years, they have now promoted this Green Line. And I must admit, it is also a very good beer. But we're very lucky. We're lucky in Chicago, and you are as well. I know the East Coast has got some great beer.
Definitely.
But I first came to the States in the late 80s.
Yeah,
and I was living in Detroit.
You were mad that all of the beers were cold when you got here?
Well, that was the first thing I could understand, because they started talking about English beer was warm.
Yeah,
and English beer is not warm. But when I came here, and I found out that you like your beer completely frozen so that there's no taste out of it, then I realised why you think our beer is warm. But when I came here, it was basically Bud Light.
Yeah, sure.
And Miller Lite. And then the only saving grace was Sam Adams.
right.
That was that was pretty much around at that stage. But then in the last 20 years, the brewing industry in America has just taken off, isn't it? It's just incredible.
Crazy.
It's wild.
You can't even keep up.
There's so many
when I
beers,
first started my travels, and I was always happy to see a Sam Adams somewhere. That was just a great beer to find, you know. And now it's like,
exactly.
I go somewhere, I need to find like what's the localist beer, and what are do you drink any UK beers anymore? You keep up with what's going on over there?
Yeah. When I was in England, I used to drink, there's a beer there called, I come from London, so I used to drink a beer called London Pride.
Oh, all right. I mean, I've seen the sign.
Traditional sort of like English ale, you know.
Yeah.
And my dad used to drink another beer called John Smith's. What a great name for a beer. I mean, how did they come up with that? John Smith's. But anyway, so that was my two beers I used to drink. And since I've been to America, I can't find John Smith's, but I have found London Pride.
Oh, all right. Nice.
Yep. There's a couple of stores that sell it here, and also there's an Irish beer called Smithwick's. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh yeah,
and
that was one of the early like import beers. I would say.
They have that in a lot of places.
But I did call it Smithwick's for a long time.
Yeah,
a long time.
We
thought it was
Smithwick's for a long time.
Easily done.
I also said
come from
Guinness though, so I don't know.
Yeah, I come from a place in England that we call Tottenham, but the way it's spelt, all Americans call it Tottenham.
Oh yeah, sure.
So I understand.
I went to Scotland.
Yeah.
I went to Scotland last year or the year before, and I had Innis and Gunn. Have you ever had that?
No, I can't recall
pretty
that one, no.
fantastic. That's a free plug for Innis and Gunn.
I do like Scottish ale, though. Yeah, there's a couple of good pubs in Chicago that sell Scottish beer and whiskey and obviously and all that kind of stuff. But no, since I've come over here, I have adapted to the American beers and some very good ones. But the only slight problem is this IPA business. You seem to be obsessed with these IPAs that are sort of like 10, 11% alcohol content, and that's a no. I'm sorry. There's no need for it to be more than 5%. That's enough.
That's true.
John has talked a little about what he's drinking. I think just very quickly, I'm having the official beer of Blotto Beatles. John, it's not an IPA. We are drinking here on the crew. It's the Devil's Purse, which is a Cape Cod local beer, and it is a Handline Kolsch beer, like a German style beer, really delicious. Yeah, good stuff.
Yes,
yeah, they make a fantastic beer.
5%
nice.
too.
Yeah,
Tom,
5%.
Thank you for that.
Scotty, looks like
and Scott, you're all drinking the same.
It's the official beer.
It's the official beer of Blotto
Official
Beatles.
beer. Of course, I knew that. I was just testing it.
Yeah, they give it to us for free, which is wonderful.
That's a good reason to drink it.
Yeah.
I must say. Yeah.
Becker, what about you, man?
Very nice.
I'm drinking a Grim artisanal ale out of Brooklyn, New York, and then I'm also drinking a little the Willet bourbon. I've still got a little bit.
That
of
pot's
this
still
kicking
burning.
around.
That bottle's been around for a while, man. Or do you just have a recycling bill clanking around with pot still bottles?
This is maybe the second or third bottle since I introduced it. But yeah, I like to have a little sip of the brown and a little sip of the beer and keep it level.
Do we actually know what beer that the Beatles drank?
I am ashamed to say I don't know.
I'm ashamed to say the same.
John has written a fantastic new book, and we're here to really dive in and talk about that a little bit,
Yeah, and I think, John, you were leaning in this direction. I would love if you would kind of talk about, for a second, what is your relationship with the Beatles? Like your first discovery, your first memory of listening to the Beatles, how they kind of impressed themselves upon you in one way or another, and maybe how that's changed over time. Like, what is it about you in this band?
Well, Tommy, we go back a long way, me and the Beatles. I was born in London in 1960, and that meant that the Beatles were always there. There was no sort of moment like you have in America with the Ed Sullivan Show, where people can kind of point to one sort of moment where they sort of really remember the Beatles coming into their lives. Or maybe when they heard I Want to Hold Your Hand would be another sort of special moment for a lot of people. I never really had any of them sort of moments. They just were always there. And in terms of early memories, they're on TV. I couldn't tell you exactly what programs. Did I see them at the Palladium or the Royal Variety Show? I probably did, but don't have that great a memory of it. I would have only been 3 years old. But I remember going to see Help, the film. I remember we got a record player in our house in the mid-'60s, so about 1965, and one of the first records we had was Paperback Writer.
Mm-hmm. What did your parents feel about the Beatles at the time? Were they...
Well, my parents were both Irish immigrants. And so the music we had in the house was basically Irish traditional music. But they were very liberal people. They did like sort of popular music. And, of course, the fact that the Beatles have a strong Irish connection meant that they would have looked on them very favourably as well. So, whenever we played pop music in the house, they were very open to it. But they were certainly of an older generation that was more into traditional Irish music, But yeah, I got a brother and sister a bit older than me. And I remember, for some reason, a plastic Beatles wig that was in the house for years. So I've no idea where that... Who the hell was wearing that?
I was really hoping you were about to reach under the desk and put it on. That's really the moment I was looking for.
Yeah. Well, if I can find a picture of me wearing it, I'll actually send it to you and you can put it on your website.
Please do.
Yeah. But, and then later on I can remember them on the David Frost show, which you've all seen, the Hey Jude film.
Yes,
where
sure.
The audience came up on stage. That was fantastic. I do remember that very, very well. And then they used to be on Top of the Pops playing Get Back from the rooftop, the rooftop concert they gave. And so, I have a lot of memories of them. But I've got to be honest with you, though, when I was growing up in the 60s, I couldn't say that the Beatles were head and shoulders my group compared to everybody else, because I also liked Herman's Hermits, I liked Hollies, Freddie and the Dreamers. I love Freddie and the Dreamers. Don't know why they never became so big over here, but I did like them. And then I also liked a lot of Motown music. and reggae was becoming very popular in Britain in the late 60s. So I remember, we used to buy Desmond Decker records or whatever. So anyway, the point I'm trying to say is that the Beatles were a group, but they didn't stand out for me beyond everybody else. They were one of a number of different groups. And then the first album we ever had in the house was Abbey Road. Mm-hmm. So again, I do remember that album pretty bit. But anyway, when I got into music, which would have been in the 70s, it was Led Zeppelin, David Bowie.
Yeah, heard of him.
Black Sabbath, and then, of course, punk. I loved punk.
Oh, yeah?
And, of course, you can tell by looking at me that I was a punker. But
who's your favorite punk band?
You're a Clash guy.
The only band that matters.
That's the only band that matters. London Calling?
We should have done a Clash episode.
I know.
Wow.
So what is the path from there to then saying, well, I'm going to write this Beatles book?
Yeah, but I think the reason why I mention that is because I think it helps me with the book, because I'm not a number one fan. I'm not somebody who goes around wearing a Let It Be T-shirt and basically says that there's nobody else besides the Beatles. I love a lot of Beatles music, but I love a lot of other people's music as well. But what that means is when you come to write a book, I think I'm more objective. Mm-hmm. I think I have that distance that I think you need if you're going to write a book of history. Because a lot of people that write Beatles books, they straight up, they even say it in the introduction, I'm the greatest fan ever. And if you're the greatest fan ever, you do lack a little bit of objective sort of view. I think you kind of want to look towards what is good and want to look towards, that basically, whatever you think about the Beatles, you want that to be in the literature that you're studying.
And what was your thought about focusing it on Chicago? Right, every sort of Beatles book finds their hook. I think your big angle is Chicago as a city. Is it as your adopted hometown, or how did you?
Yeah, partly. I mean, obviously, it made it easier to do the research when I live here rather than travelling to archives or whatever. But no, the reason I did that is because when I first thought of the idea of the book, it really came out of my last book. My last book was the America and the British Imagination, and it included parts about the Beatles in it. And it was basically about, as it says on the tin, how the British viewed America since World War II. And so I finished that book in 2013. And so what I wanted to do was write a book that was kind of like the mirror image of that. Instead of the British view of America, I wanted the American view of Britain. And at that time, you probably remember there was the big talk about the 50th anniversary of the Beatles coming to America. That was, 2013, building up to the Ed Sullivan 50th anniversary. Yeah. So they kind of, it jumped to my mind that really what I should write about is about how Americans looked at the Beatles, not just looked at Britain. And when I thought of that idea, I kind of realized pretty quickly that America is just too diverse. It's such a regional country, especially more so in the 60s than it is now, where you had different traditions, different ethnic groups, different races, different media, different politics, everything, different music scenes. Everything was so regional. And so what I wanted to do was, therefore, I realized it was pointless to do a book about how America viewed the Beatles. It just wouldn't get into that nice detail which I wanted to get. And so therefore I had to pick a place, and the obvious place was Chicago, because it was the second biggest city in America at the time. I think it's more, quote, American than New York or LA would be. I think it's a city that has got a large black population, and I wanted to look at that because I don't think of any book on the Beatles has ever really looked at how African Americans viewed the Beatles. I wanted to do that.
Well, and how the Beatles also appreciated their black influence, from Motown and early doo-wop and things like that. I thought was great.
And also Chicago music. I mean, they loved the Impressions and Major Lance and obviously Chess Records, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley. There's a lot of that comes out of.
Well, and you made a great point about that they were refusing to play in places where the audience would be segregated. That, for whatever they say about peace and love and being together and all this, that they were practicing what they preached through, even in those early years, not when they became whatever we want to say about them in the second half of their career and talking more about some level of revolutionary idea and cultural shift and things. But from go, they are saying this is important to us. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, their views on race were very admirable, especially for the 1960s. Mm-hmm. The fact that they loved African-American music, as you know, obviously, and they always told people that. It's not as if it was some sort of like hidden part of their repertoire. They straight away, as soon as they come to America, they said, we like Motown and we like Chuck Berry. And so they advertised the fact that they loved African-American music. And then, like you say, I think they did try their best to sort of live up to these principles. They wouldn't play in South Africa because it was apartheid. They refused to play to segregated audiences in America. But even then, later on, when they adopted their beliefs about Hinduism, and they became very enamored with South Asian culture, Indian culture. Again, in England at that time, people from South Asia, they were sort of the major immigrant population coming to England at that time. They faced enormous discrimination. Mm-hmm. Their food was considered to be just sort of like not even proper food. Their religions were laughed at. They were beaten up in the streets. And there's the Beatles that are publicly saying that we admire this culture that comes from India. So I do admire that part about the Beatles as well. I think that their views on race were certainly very progressive for the time. And
even in the back of that with Ravi Shankar, George taking Ravi Shankar on tour in the 70s is the audience is not necessarily looking for that, and he's letting him play essentially like an entire set, right? And people are not that excited about it, right? I think
when he plays in 74. I was looking at the reviews in Chicago, and of course they weren't very good because people didn't want to hear Indian music, and they didn't want to hear George Harrison croaking through rearranged Beatles songs either. But you're right, the Indian music did turn a lot of people off. But yeah,
controversially though, it seems that you gloss over the fact that George Martin hates deep dish pizza. Did you find that in your research?
You know what? If I did, I would have changed my opinion of him completely. No, I've got to be honest. I hope nobody's listening to this. I can't stand it either. I don't like deep
so it's
dish
an English
pizza.
thing.
I don't see the point. I like thin pizza. Mm-hmm. I don't like deep dish.
Yeah. I'm with you.
If you want to edit that out, you can. But I'm just saying, I don't know.
I don't live in Chicago. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I know. But I'm the one that has to walk the streets.
That's right.
But no, anyway, in terms of going back to African Americans, but then what I also found is that African Americans played a major role in the Beatles story. And that's something that really, we're in Black History Month now, and it doesn't really get celebrated enough because, as you know, again, the first record label to release Beatles singles and albums in the US was owned by African Americans. We certainly know that WLS was not certainly know, but we think that they were the ones that played the first Beatles song in the US. But also their second song was picked up by a lot of African American. From Me to You was picked up by a lot of African American radio stations. And I spoke to a lot of people that remember hearing the Beatles in the 60s on these African American radio stations, and they weren't sure if they were a black group or a white group. A lot of the time, they actually thought they were a black group. And also, when the Beatles then
can I interrupt? Because I don't know if I do know this, but are you saying that VJ Records is a black-owned record label?
That's right. Yeah, it's owned by two a husband and wife team, and it was basically the next biggest to Motown.
Yeah,
if Motown was the biggest, VJ was the next biggest, and it was African American owned, and they basically, because they had influence in Chicago amongst African American radio stations, they were then able to get the Beatles singles played on the African American radio stations. And then like I say, in '64, then when the Beatles really hit, it was Capitol Records that then released their records. Yeah, obviously. Mm-hmm. And but then what happened is black newspapers basically picked up on the Beatles, including the Chicago Defender. And it's quite remarkable to read the Chicago Defender in 1964 because they were also very impressed with the Beatles, and they were running contests for their readership based around the Beatles, including one which was for Hard Day's Night. When Hard Day's Night played in Chicago, the end of August '64, premiered in Chicago, the Chicago Defender ran a contest to go and see the film, and you can see it in the papers, the pages of the newspaper, that everybody that went to see the movie that won the tickets was African American. And then if you look at the stores in the south side and west side of Chicago, they were full of Beatles memorabilia. And so, the African Americans, they played a big role in the rise of the Beatles in America. And, you probably say, well, was there that many at the concerts? And pretty obviously, no, there wasn't. But I think that's because of various reasons. One is some of the concerts, like the one in Chicago, was in the southwest side of the city, which was notorious for being a place where it was dangerous for African Americans to go to. So I spoke to a woman that did go to the concert, a young African American girl at the time, and what she did was pretty brave. Her and her friend went to the concert. They were walked there by her mother. They were scared, but once they got in there, they were fine. But I think that's why if you look at concert pictures, there isn't that many African Americans in the audience. There is some, but not that many. But I think that doesn't mean that a lot of African Americans didn't like the Beatles, because I think they were. They were enormously popular in black neighborhoods, just like they were in white neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking here about 64, 65. Yeah.
I do have a couple specific points I picked up on in the book I'd like to touch upon, and just, I don't know if they'll garner much discussion, but they really piqued my interest. John, you pointed out at one point in the book that in 1964, in Chicago, you're putting it on the fame of the Beatles and Beatlemania, that guitars all of a sudden, for the first time ever, outsold accordions in the Windy City. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That is a very Midwest vibe.
Yeah, it's Chicago is the heart of big polka in America, exactly. Right? Did this just put a stake in the heart of polka?
You know what? I think I wouldn't say that put a knife in the polka, because a friend of mine plays in the Polkaholics, and he'll kill me if I say that. But no, but there's no doubt about it. It did change the texture of the music. Now, funny enough, some of the bands, early bands, they actually carried on with the accordion. So you had sort of like garage bands playing with accordions, which were quite good. But it is true, they did change the texture of the music, and also what instruments. But I got to be honest, when I researched about the Chicago music scene, you don't really hear much about Chicago music in the 60s. You really don't. I mean, rock music. You do, African-American music, but not really rock music. And the more I researched it, I found that it was an amazing scene, really. And the people were so young.
Right.
They were like 13 years old.
Yeah,
picking up guitars. And the reason they did is so many of them said it is because they saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. And what they saw is there was no dance routines, there was no backing singers, there was no horn section. All it was four people looking like they were enjoying themselves, and girls were going nuts. And if you were 13, you'd pick up a guitar. Yeah. I would have, and you three would have as well.
We were talking about punk earlier, and I just think, right, you think about Elvis, you think about the Beatles, you think about the path to punk, and it is just sort of like democratizing music. It's just making it more accessible. It's making it feel like, oh, I can make this noise. I played in punk bands. We all played in bands as kids together. And it just, right, the Beatles are part of that, right? Like, no one thought that they could be Elvis, and no one probably thought that they could be the Beatles, but they could be like the Beatles. And that's probably started this chain reaction,
Yeah, and of course it is that group conception, isn't it? The fact that there were four friends, four equal friends.
It's a gang, and I love the Beatles are a gang. Like, I like to
They
say
all
that.
said that. There wasn't one person out front with a backing band.
Yeah.
It was basically four people that when you see them getting interviewed, they were interchangeable. It just looked like a nice group of friends, and that's what people really am. But the other thing, I just want to say this also about Chicago music, but not just Chicago. I know it happened elsewhere. I was amazed at the number of girl bands that came out of Chicago in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And that, I do really think, I mean, maybe you might think differently, but I can't think really of many, if any, all-female groups playing instruments, I don't mean singing groups, before the Beatles.
Yeah.
No. It's really very difficult to think of any.
True.
But once the Beatles come out, I think a lot of girls, because the music was kind of girl-centered, let's be honest, the Beatles don't look that macho. They kind of look a bit kind of...
Not until they grow those great beards and stuff. But
well, yeah, okay, they got a bit, and there was a bit of sort of like hairy chest from Paul McCartney. But I do think in general they were kind of like pale, scrawny Englishmen. And so I don't think, I think that women could see themselves sort of like in the Beatles. And then the fact that they had harmonies, the fact that they played sort of music that was kind of like girl group, as in sort of like the Ronettes and Shirelles kind of emulate them. I think, in other words, for girls even, you could look at the Beatles and say, I could do that. That looks like us.
We can make this noise.
We can make this work. And it is amazing how many did form all-girl bands. And some of them, again, didn't release records. Some of them released one. Some of them released a number of records. And that's also something amazing that came out of the Beatles coming to America as well.
That's an amazing angle. I don't think we've even touched on that in the pod.
So, John, you are an unabashed historian. We know this. And
I am. That's what I get paid for.
And you did state earlier that you were trying to have an objective lens when looking at the Beatles and writing this book. And
that's what us historians try to do.
I'm going to say that there's one place where I find some subjectivity here, okay? Did you intend to paint the mayor of Chicago at the time, Mayor Daley, as like a mustache twirling villain wearing a cape at all? Because it does. From the moment the Beatles try and come in, he's like, get those Beatles out of here. I don't want to see them. And then even down to like the political movements at the end, he's like, these Beatles are ruining the country. And, it was a little like Scooby-Doo. I could have seen him, they have him in the rope. He's like, and I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for you Beatles and your wigs.
Yeah, Mayor Daley does play a good, he's one of the characters in the book.
Oh, he's an excellent character in the book. I love it.
Yeah, and he was the mayor of Chicago, if you can believe this, from 1955 to when he died in office in 1976. So if he was alive, he'd still be mayor now, And so... And he dominates Chicago, and he's also a big player in American politics. If you wanted to run for president under the Democratic ticket, you had to go and see Mayor Daley, which Bobby Kennedy did in 1968. And he asked Mayor Daley, have you got any advice for me? And Mayor Daley said, yes, get your hair cut.
Wow.
Just so amazing to think about that time, or if you thought about a politician now who would even have time to sort of focus on something like that, to think that this was such a cultural shift that you're trying to concern about.
But other mayors were giving them the keys to the city.
Right.
Sure.
New Orleans, the mayor was basically, they were turning up at their press conferences, shaking hands with them, having their pictures taken. Wives and children of some of these mayors were publicly going to the concerts and having their pictures taken. So it's not as if this was all over America. This was basically Mayor Daley in Chicago.
Well, and it's amazing. I'm clearly joking and exaggerating the point of you making him the villain of the book. But to think of this guy, like what the Democratic Party is today, and that this guy, this mayor is a member of the not only a member, but clearly a high-ranking or high thought of member of the party.
Influential,
a very influential member of the party. Thank you. And he's so afraid of this cultural shift. It's wild. What a different time.
The other point in the book that I thought was pretty interesting that I actually haven't focused that much on is George Harrison coming to the U.S. Ahead of Beatlemania and his sister being in Illinois. And I actually thought that was pretty crazy. That John, I'm sure that I'm relatively had read this somewhere, but that the fact that George had come out and visited his sister, and that she is here in the States and sort of a big proponent of her brother at the time, I thought was a great point that you play up here.
Yeah, I interviewed his sister Louise Harrison, and she's a great woman. And she ended up living in southern Illinois with her husband, and she was a lot older than George, so she never actually saw the Beatles in England. She didn't go to the Cavern or anything like that. She was already grown up and moved away. And so when he started to get this band and started telling her about the Beatles and how popular they were in England, she tried to break them in America by getting them played on local radio stations and etc. And he came to visit her in September 1969. And I found this article where he talked about his visit and about his view of America. And they all loved America. I mean, they were enamored with America, going back to when they were children. And when he went there, he couldn't believe it. The amount of blue sky. Might be a little thing, but, for Brits, we don't really see blue skies. Wow. Or if we do, it's very fleeting. And here you are in Illinois, and it's hot, blue sky all the time. Then he couldn't believe about the air conditioning, the TVs that had a number of different channels, radio stations that had more than one BBC channel. I mean, it was just a staggering experience for him. And of course, the other wonderful thing about
which is an interesting point, because that is also becomes the media vehicle that later makes them the biggest band in the world, right? Is there a little bit of the fact that sort of there is a singular BBC that propels the Beatles forward, like that there isn't competition,
I think so. I think there's a lot of, I think the fact that the BBC and that they're on the BBC so much, and also that there was needle time agreements with the union, so you couldn't play that many records, and so therefore you had to have live acts. I think that really helped the Beatles and also the other British invasion groups, if you want to call them that, or beat groups in England. I think you're absolutely right. But of course, when they came to America, though, they just could not believe this DJ patter that you had over here, and also the number of stations playing constant records, which they were never doing in England. And they loved the American radio. But he was just blown away by America, and that was September '63. And of course, then in February '64, when he came over, she met him in New York. And then she also ended up going to the concerts in Chicago in 64 and 65. And in 65, they did actually stay overnight. They stayed 2 nights in a hotel. And she went to visit him in the hotel with some of her friends, actually, that he'd met in that September '63 visit to I mean, it's
got to be amazingly exciting to see your brother come over and have him be part of Beatlemania. I mean, that's got to be my brother's never paid off that well. So
no, same with me. My brother's definitely not giving me anything like that. But the fact that in '69 he could walk around basically undisturbed, he also loved as well. Mm-hmm. I think that visit was something that he really cherished. And the fact, of course, he went to New York on that visit as well. So he must have been amazed at New York. He never went to Chicago, but he went to the Shawnee National Forest, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a spectacular forest in southern Illinois. And he talked, lovingly about that place as well. So he was very, very impressed with that visit in '69 and '63. Sorry,
that's beautiful. Yeah.
John, thanks a ton for hanging out with us today. You have the new book coming out. Let the people know where they can find you and where they can pick up the book.
Yes, the book is available on all the usual retailers, Amazon, etc., etc. If you want to buy it through independent bookstores, obviously they will stock the book as well.
Yes.
In terms of following me, I am actually the king of all social media. So you can follow me on Facebook, You can follow me on Twitter, and you can even follow me on Instagram. And what I'm doing on Instagram is I am posting eventually all, of my collection of Beatles interviews.
Oh, nice.
Very cool.
Really nice. And I've got thousands. So I could be about 200 years old by the time I finish it. But I'm basically every single day I put a new Beatles interview on there, and including what's coming up, this will get you intrigued, is did you even know that he was interviewed by Albert Goldman?
Who was?
Sorry, John Lennon was. What do you mean he? John Lennon was.
Wow.
Sorry.
No, I didn't know that.
I had no idea.
We speak a lot about Goldman in
yes,
in
you
one
do.
of our earlier
a lot
episodes.
of people do. He interviewed him in a 2-piece magazine special.
Wow.
Interesting.
Wow.
I'm not going to tell you where it is, but if you want to see it,
So what is that Instagram handle? Where do people find that?
I think I'm John F. Lyons Beatles on there.
John F.
right.
Lyons, John F.
I
Lyons
think I
Beatles.
am. I
Check
think
it out. We clearly follow you. We wouldn't let that go by without.
We'll be sure to
follow
promote
me? I
that.
don't think you do, actually.
We do. We absolutely.
You brought this
follow
up
you.
earlier.
You sure?
I'm
I
gonna
know
throw
I
you.
follow you, but
I'm going to
really
throw you a
think-
like as soon as we hang up. I'm about to throw you a like. So
I want more than a like. I mean, but yeah. Anyway, but yeah, I think it's John F. Lyons Beatles. But you can find me anyway. It's Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Instagram interviews. The other two is material that either is in the book or material that I couldn't fit in the book because I did so much research and I couldn't put it all in there.
thank you very much. That's John Lyons and his new book, Joy and Fear: The Beatles in Chicago and the 1960s. John, thank you so much for all your time this evening. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh,
John.
thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Again, I would say I'm chuffed to be on your show.
Yes.
We were chuffed to
Love
have you,
Jeff.
my friend, and let's do it again sometime.